objection.
Madam President, too many Americans are out of work. We know that. And without a steady income, it's hard for families to stay current on their monthly expenses. We've all talked about the consequences of losing a job, and when I meet with the unemployed in Illinois, one of the first things we talk about is health insurance, because that's one of the first casualties. It's very difficult, if not impossible, for someone unemployed to maintain COBRA payments once they're out of work. They'll deplete their savings and find themselves in a very vulnerable position. Some fall behind on mortgage payments. More than 4 million families lost their homes during the housing crisis, which began in 2008. Another 10.7 million Americans own mortgages underwater. It was interesting, one of the major mortgage banking associations in Washington, D.C. recently had a short sale of their headquarters building in Washington. They went underwater. They couldn't pay their mortgage, and they ended up selling. It's happening not just to business, obviously, but to a lot of homeowners. It's hard to keep up with these basic expenses. A lot of people who used to donate to food banks are now in line at the food banks, trying to supplement their incomes. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 1 out of 6 Americans really have a food issue. They're hungry. It's the highest level since the government started taking these numbers in 1995. But there's another obligation, financial obligation, that needs a little more focus here in Washington. Private student loan debt is becoming the biggest burden for families across America. Student loan debt in October of 2010, for the first time in our history, surpassed credit card debt in America. At public universities, the average debt for a graduating student was $20,200. At private nonprofits, $27,650. For students of for-profit colleges, the debt burden is even greater. Students at for-profit colleges graduated with an average debt of $33,000. More than 3 out of 4 young adults say that college has become harder to afford in the past 5 years. Almost as many say that graduates have more student debt than they can possibly manage. There are few penalties for schools whose students incur huge amounts of debts when the kids can't repay their loan. How did we reach this point? Well, 2 trends have led to this phenomenal level of student loan debt. First, the for-profit college industry has grown by leaps and bounds over the last decade. It is the fastest growing sector of higher education. 3 numbers put it in perspective. 10% of students out of high school end up in for-profit schools, 10%. Yet for-profit schools consume 25% of all the federal aid to education and account for 44% of student loan defaults. What's the obvious conclusion? They are drawing in, these for-profit colleges, more student loan assistance from the federal government than their counterparts in the public and nonprofit area. And secondly, their students, deep in debt, can't find jobs to pay off their debts and default on their loans. Second, the cost of college is so far out of reach for most people, they exhaust their ability to borrow from the government and end up taking out private loans. These private loans are not federally guaranteed. The issuer is not required to work with you to consolidate the loans or restructure them in the future. If that sounds familiar, that's because many of the banks issuing these loans are the same banks holding your mortgage. Even more outrageous, these loans are protected in bankruptcy, and what that means is, unlike other loans that we would incur in our lives that we might bring into a bankruptcy court in desperation, these loans cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. These loans will trail the borrowers to the grave. Student loan decisions made at the age of 19, 20, and 21 years of age end up being a lifetime of responsibility. Yesterday, one of the presidents of a small, very good college in Illinois said that so many students that she meets with who are interested in going to school are debt numb. They don't even understand debt as it might affect them today and tomorrow. And unfortunately, these for-profit schools and many others are taking advantage of students with little or no life experience who end up many times with their parents signing up for student loan debt that is unconscionable at levels they'll never be able to repay in any reasonable time, and often, when it comes to for-profit schools, for worthless diplomas, if the student is lucky enough to finish. One of my constituents, Hannah Moore, recently contacted my office regarding her outstanding student debt, and I wanted to bring this to the attention of the Senate. In 2007, Hannah graduated with a Bachelor of Arts from a for-profit school. It's called the Harrington College of Design. It was part of the Career Education Corporation program. When Hannah graduated in 2007 from the Harrington College of Design, her student debt was $124,570. After she exhausted all her federal student loan options, she turned to private loans when she wanted to finish and get a degree. At first, she tried to manage her payments of close to $800 a month by working 3 jobs. Her federal loan is a reasonable payment because she signed up for the income-based repayment program, but the private loan demands are unreasonable. When the payments became unmanageable, she tried to work out a plan with her lender. They refused. She said that she speaks to her lender about once a month, asking for assistance with no help. When it became apparent she wouldn't be able to afford the payments, her family offered to help. Her dad, who had retired, got a job just to help his daughter make her student loan repayments. Dad went back to work out of retirement. Her parents spend their time stressing over her loans now with her. Hannah is 30 years old. She wants to be independent, but her student debt of over $124,000 is making that impossible. With the help of her family, Dad going back to work and all she can do, she makes her monthly payments, but her life is still very much on hold. She said, "My education doesn't feel rewarding. It's a burden." When asked how her student loan debt is affecting her life, she said, "I can't start a family, can't buy a house, I can't even buy a car." She rides her bike to work. Think about that. She went to college, she stuck with it, she graduated with a degree of no value and $124,000 in student debt. She isn't alone. Every week I hear from constituents who are seeking relief, and I invite them to come to my website and tell me their stories about student loan debt in America. Last week, the President, in his State of the Union, spoke about a plan to keep the cost of higher education from going even further. His proposal will provide better information to families while enlisting colleges and state governments to partner with the federal government to keep costs down while improving student outcomes. To make sure students and families have accurate information, the President has proposed creating a college scorecard for all institutions of higher education, all of them. The scorecard will provide families with clear, concise information about affordability and student outcomes. How many students go to this school and finish? How many that finish with a degree get a job? It's a pretty basic question. Then students and their families can make a good choice. They won't be overwhelmed by the spam and ads tossed at them on the Internet. The plan would reward schools that provide a good value and serve low-income students and set responsible tuition policies. These schools will be rewarded with additional campus-based financial aid so that more students can attend college. The President's proposal builds on the success of the current Race to the Top program by creating a new Race to the Top program rewarding college affordability and completion. This Race to the Top challenge will incentivize governors and state legislatures around the nation to join us in keeping tuition costs down. Following the President's challenge of keeping college costs down, the Senate Help Committee is holding a hearing this week on college affordability. I thank them for that. It is long overdue, and I look forward to working with Senators Harkin and Enzi on this issue. And let me say this in closing. A hearing that we had just a week or so ago in Chicago on the abuse of the GI Bill education rights by for-profit schools should be a wake-up call to every member of Congress. Holly Petraeus, the wife of General Petraeus, testified. She works at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an agency which is in the news and controversial because its executive director, Richard Cordray, was announced by the President by executive appointment when the Senate refused to give him an opportunity to serve. The Senate refused to break a filibuster on Mr. Cordray, even though I heard no speeches criticizing his ability. The speeches criticized the agency, which some Republicans loathe and despise. But it is in the law, and it should be given a chance to work, and those who are critical of it should meet with Holly Petraeus, General Petraeus' wife. She is working for military families, trying to stop the abuses of for-profit schools when it comes to the GI Bill. That is something we should all join together on, Democrats and Republicans alike. The men and women who served us in the military are entitled not only to the GI Bill, but to institutions of learning that give them a chance to take their time in school and turn it into a much better life for themselves and their families. I hope that we can come together on the question of affordability and on taking a close look at many of these institutions of higher learning that are unfortunately defrauding many innocent children, families, and veterans who are returning from the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Madam President, at this time I would like to ask 3 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate with the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask consent these requests be agreed to and printed in the record.
Without objection.
And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Well, the Senate gavelled in this morning at 9:30 Eastern. They started with morning business. Right now, work's underway on a bill preventing insider trading by members of Congress. It's known as the Stock Act. We do expect more amendments and related votes through the rest of the week. We heard Majority Leader Reid at the beginning of today's session mention that Republican senators have a special luncheon scheduled for today. This is not expected to affect the business of the Senate today, although there is also a 4 o'clock closed-door briefing on cybersecurity issues. Obviously, we cannot bring you any coverage of that. The House gavelled in this morning at 10 Eastern. They started with general speeches. They're in recess right now. Legislative business will get underway at noon Eastern with work on a measure extending the federal pay freeze. This would extend a ban on pay raises for about 2.25 million federal workers.
Further proceedings under the quorum code be dispensed with.
Without objection. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S-2038, which the clerk will report.
Calendar number 301, S-2038, a bill to prohibit members of Congress and employees of Congress from using non-public information derived from their official positions for personal benefit and for other purposes.
I thank the Chair. Madam President, it's a new day, and with it comes the hope that we will make some more progress than we did yesterday. Actually, we were prepared after some good work by the four of us, Senator Collins, Senator Brown, the occupant of the chair, Senator Gillibrand, myself, and our staffs, to move forward yesterday afternoon. Unfortunately, we were blocked in that, but I know efforts continue to allow us to at least proceed with the amendment that Senator Paul introduced that was modified or prepared to be modified after discussion with, I think, a reasonable conclusion that will be supported by most members of the Senate. There's so much that we can do here. Our staffs worked overnight. They've tried to divide the amendments into those that are germane and relevant, those that are not. We understand that leadership on both sides will be talking about how to proceed. And I repeat what I said at the outset, and I know all of us who've worked so hard on this to respond to the concern that members of Congress and our staffs are not covered by insider trading laws, that we not try to solve every problem or correct every potential source of public mistrust of Congress on this bill for fear that we'll therefore never get anything accomplished. And I'm hopeful that as the morning goes on and certainly into the afternoon after discussions that occur at lunch hour, that we will be able to proceed to handle some amendments in an expeditious way, and that we can see our way to the end of consideration of this bill, remembering that on the basic provisions of the bill, we've got overwhelming bipartisan support. I understand that the vote on cloture to proceed does not exactly express support for the final vote, but there were only 2 who voted against cloture, so clearly the overwhelming number of members of the Senate want to proceed to vote on the bill. If we don't break this unfortunate and really unnecessary and harmful gridlock, either the majority leader is going to have to file cloture or leave the bill and go on to other pressing business, FAA reauthorization and the like. And that would be, I think, not only disappointing to us, but having aroused the hope that we would respond to the public concern, anger about the possibility that we're not covered by insider trading laws, we will have ended up increasing that concern and anger and disenchantment with Congress, and I don't think any of us want to do that. So with that appeal to our colleagues to apply a certain rule of reason here so that we can get something done that will be good for our government and the people's respect for us, I'm very pleased to see my colleague from Connecticut, Senator Blumenthal, here. I know he has an amendment that he wants to offer at this time, and I would yield the floor to him.
Madam President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you to the presiding officer, distinguished senator from New York, and to my colleague, Senator Lieberman, Senator Collins, and Senator Brown for your superb leadership on this issue. And I'm very pleased to strongly support the underlying bill, Senate 1261, and I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendments be set aside.
Without objection.
And I also ask unanimous consent to call up amendment number 1498.
Without objection. Clerk will report.
The senator from Connecticut, Mr. Blumenthal, for himself and Mr. Kirk, proposes an amendment number 1498 to amendment number 1470. At the appropriate place, insert the following section: application to other elected officials in criminal offenses. A, application to other elected officials. 1, civil service retirement system.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you. Essentially, this amendment very simply and directly assures that members of Congress who may be prosecuted and convicted of the offenses specified in Senate S. 1261 also should see their pensions revoked, along with potentially other crimes that they may have committed. The purpose essentially is to assure the credibility of Congress by revoking pensions of corrupt members of Congress, not only those that may be convicted under this pending bill, insider trading, but also a variety of other public corruption offenses. In fact, the amendment adds 22 new public corruption offenses to existing law that merit cancellation or revoking of congressional pensions. I've worked with this amendment with Senator Kirk, who unfortunately could not be with us today. He and his staff have been integral. It is a bipartisan proposed statute that is similar to the one that I worked to enact in Connecticut when I was the Attorney General there, and the guiding principle is absolutely crystal clear, consistent with the basic measure we're considering. Not one dime of taxpayer money should go to corrupt elected officials. Over the past 50 years, members of Congress have been convicted of 16 separate felonies, so the need for this measure is considerable, even if it is a small minority of the members of Congress. And in fact, right now, approximately $800,000 a year are paid to members of Congress who have been convicted of these kinds of felonies. So I want to particularly thank Senator Kirk and quote him, since he could not be here today. He said earlier this year of this legislation, and I'm quoting, "American taxpayers should not be on the hook for pension benefits of convicted felons. Expanding current law to include additional public corruption felonies will block pension benefits for members of Congress who fail to honor their pledge to defend the Constitution and uphold the laws of the United States. Once you have violated the public trust in that way, I think that the taxpayers should not be supporting your retirement." End of quote. In short, very simply, a breach of law by an elected official is a serious offense that should have consequences. Taxpayers should not pay for the retirement benefits of elected officials convicted of a felony, members of Congress, anyone else, especially as the United States faces the soaring deficits that it does now and the crippling debt that grows even higher. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Quorum call on the floor of the Senate as senators continue working on the Stock Act, preventing insider trading by members of Congress. Appear to be at least 15 amendments to consider so far. We do expect more and related votes throughout the rest of the week. The Senate is expected to hold a closed-door briefing on cybersecurity issues this afternoon at 4. They may go into recess for that. And, of course, live coverage of the Senate, as always, here on C-SPAN 2. A couple of news stories to pass on to you today. Mitt Romney's presidential campaign has been informed that it will start receiving Secret Service protection tomorrow. Two campaign sources and a senior Republican with ties to the campaign have told ABC News this. Secret Service protection is being given to the campaign not because of a specific threat, but because of the increase in crowd sizes as the primary season has progressed over the past few weeks, according to sources who refuse to be identified because they don't have authority to comment on such matters. Also this, from Politico this afternoon, Senator Tom Coburn, actually this morning, he is blocking legislation that would provide $20 million a year in federal funding for the National September 11th Memorial and Museum at Ground Zero, demanding that co-sponsors of the bill come up with pay cuts, or actually cuts, that is, to pay for the spending. His office has confirmed that to Politico. This move has angered co-sponsors of the bill, including Senators Gillibrand and Chuck Schumer, who are both Democrats from New York. Senator Coburn is a physician. He's often referred to as the Senate's Dr. No. He initially blocked that bill earlier, which provided health care and other aid to first responders who were sickened by dust from the World Trade Center attack. He was objecting to it because it was being rushed through the Senate, but he eventually relented. That bill passed unanimously during the 2010 lame duck session. And you can read all of that story in today's Politico.
Madam President,